Well, I'm back. I took a few minutes. I got abducted by aliens. About the fourth time this happened to me. For those who've never been abducted by aliens, it's a heck of an experience. It's really good. Now, our electoral system is interesting. President doesn't get directly elected. Gets elected by electoral college. Something we're still wrestling with and maybe change, and we're not going to get into detail. This class is not about the electoral college. But our people are elected through single member, single district. They call it single member, single district. Or plurality, or the British term, first past the post. What does that mean? That means the person who gets elected to a particular congressional district in Wisconsin isn't the person who gets a majority of the vote. It's the person who gets the most votes. Well, it seems like a majority because usually there's two parties running. And we have a real difficult hurdles for third parties in this country. It's easier to get on the ballot as a third party in Russia than the United States. Our two major parties really make it hard for third parties to get on the ballot. But it's really who gets the most votes. Let me illustrate it this way. Let's pretend we all live right now in this district in Wisconsin, and there's 500,000 voters. And everybody decides to run for Congress. Everybody. And gets on the ballot. And so we all go vote. And we all vote for ourselves. But you have an uncle, I don't know if it's the same uncle I talked about earlier, who has a few the night before and riding a snowmobile is kind of tired the next day, and he decides to vote for you. And you got 2 votes. With those 2 votes, you go to Washington, D.C., you go to Congress. So it's not a majority, it's a plurality. Single member, single district, 1 member from a district, the person who gets the most votes. And that, if you learn anything else, a third of people in my class normally, by the end of the semester, I ask them this question and they say majority. They can't get it through their heads that it's the most votes. So try to get it in. It's the most votes, a plurality, not a majority. It just seems that way as a majority because usually there's just 2 parties. The other thing we have going in this country is another concept I want to introduce to the class, is the concept of political culture. All countries have a political culture. What is the political culture? It's kind of the aggregation of people's sum total of attitudes towards government, towards freedom of the press, towards free elections. And countries that are lucky, are democratic, tend to have a consensual political culture. That means most people agree on the rules of the game. If you go to the far right political extreme, and all the way on the far right is Adolf Hitler and Nazis, all the way far left is, Stalin and communists, most people are somewhere in the middle, slightly right of center, slightly left of center. That's where most people are. That's a consensual political culture. And we're fortunate enough because when you have a consensual political culture, people agree on the rules of the game, you have a fairly stable political system. And our political parties are right of center. The Republicans, although some Republicans are here, and some are here. Tea Party Republicans and conservative Christian Republicans are here, and sort of economic and corporate Republicans are here. And Democrats are here. And then you have some Democrats that are farther left, want more government, more social programs. And over here you got Nazis and you got commies. And our parties aren't either communist nor Nazi, no matter what they call each other. That's a consensual political culture. What happens in a country if people are divided by ideology, like we see sometimes on TV between Fox News and MSNBC, and if a country's like this, are divided by ideology, there's no real center, there's just this. Well, I can think of a country that had this kind of setup, where people divided by ideology, divided by ethnic groups, and over issues like slavery, and there's no middle. Guess what happens? Civil war, and a lot of blood. So, we're fortunate again, we have a consensual political culture, people agree on the rules of the game, separation of power, single member, single district, plurality election system. Now, of course, same thing with senators. The senator who gets the most votes in the state wins, not the ones who gets the majority. And a judiciary that has power, and a common law interpretive legal system where judges interpret the law and can overthrow an legislative act. Overthrow it. And the only way you can undo it is to have a constitutional amendment. And this Constitution has had 27 amendments, but the first 10 were right away. As legend would have it, Madison sent Thomas Jefferson, who was in France at the time, a copy of the Constitution. And France was watching the French Revolution, Jefferson, and the issues about the rights of man and their Constitution. Said, Jim Bob, I'm not sure if he called him Jim Bob, said, Jim Bob, this isn't good unless you have a Bill of Rights. So right away they added a Bill of Rights, 10 amendments to the Constitution. And since then we've had 17 more, but 2 of them don't count. That was Prohibition. Really? Yeah. So we've had essentially 15 amendments since the beginning. That's the Constitution. It has some flexibility and certainly some staying power over time. The Constitution of India, since 1949, has had over 800 amendments. Imagine that. So they've got a pretty good job. I'll say they got it closer to getting right in terms of the reflections of what human nature is about than anybody's ever done with the Constitution. These are some pretty smart dudes. So we had amendments to the Constitution. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the government cannot establish a religion nor present the free enterprise, exercise of religion. Now, why did they separate freedom of religion from freedom of speech? Because our founding fathers, who saw what happened in Europe, thought religious speech was more dangerous than political speech. They saw it differently. And the Second Amendment, well, of course, the right to bear arms and militia, we argue about that all the time. And I personally would like to have a bazooka and a small tactical nuclear device in my garage. Actually, I spent a lot of years in Montana. I'm a hunter and a gun owner. But I left the NRA back in 1982 because I'm about hunting and conservation, but we won't get into that. The Second Amendment, other amendments about illegal search and seizure, you can't testify against yourself. And over the years we added amendments, we freed the slaves, women got the right to vote, and over the years we've added 15 amendments to the original 10, and not counting alcohol, prohibition back and forth. Prohibition was kind of an interesting period of time. So this is this Constitution, this edifice, the first modern Constitution in the world, and it's held up pretty well. Now, should we change it? Well, people have a lot of ideas. I only have one idea to change it. Only one. Every country in the world votes on the weekends on Saturday, so people can show up to vote and not have to work. We vote on Tuesday. It makes it tough. That was our original idea was to insulate some of the rabble from voting. Our founders wanted to insulate people from what they call direct democracy. Only the House was directly elected. The Senate was appointed by local legislatures. The president got elected by the electoral college, and the judiciary got appointed. They were afraid of real, true, direct democracy. Plato was afraid of it. They figured it would be chaotic. Our founding fathers would never be into referendums or state initiatives like we have now, where a state has a referendum to legalize something or unlegalize it. They were into representative government. We are a republic, which is a representative democracy. Direct democracy is where everybody votes on every issue, gets on a computer and votes on everything. Then changes their mind a week later and wants to undo it. Pretty messy. Okay.